Welcome to AP Human Geography, Unit 7, Industrial and Economic Development. Hi, this is Mr. Jacoby, and today's review will focus on how industrialization and economic processes shape development and global inequality. Our learning targets will be defining development, identifying economic sectors, explaining industrial location models, and analyzing global inequality. Let's start out with development. Development is an improvement in the standard of living. It's measured by three things: income, education, and health. The Human Development Index shows the development of countries or states around the world. The HDI looks at life expectancy or health of a population, the education of a population, and the income of a population. Combined, these factors create a measurement that can be used to compare all of the different countries around the world evenly. This unit also looks at economic sectors that exist in different states around the world and uses that to determine the development or non-development of specific countries. The sectors include the primary sector, which is pulling raw materials out of the earth, including farming, mining, forestry, and fishing. The secondary sector includes taking all the raw materials from the primary sector and turning them into products, whether it be food products or clothing or precious gems. The tertiary sector includes the services sector, which is the selling of products made in the secondary sector, which includes stores, restaurant, or anything where you are selling a product or offering a service. K-12 education is in the tertiary sector, where teachers aren't producing new information, but they are imparting this information to students. The quaternary sector is the knowledge sector, how to make things, creating new products. We find higher education is in this sector, professors who are creating new knowledge. Finally, the quinary sector. This is the leadership sector, the governments that decide just how services will operate. The current economic structure trends that exist worldwide are that more developed countries are mainly service economies and above, while most developing or less developed countries sit in the primary and secondary sectors for most of their economies. That does not mean that primary and secondary does not exist in service-based economies. They do. The United States still has farms and still produces, but just not very many. And in developing countries, where it's mostly primary and secondary, there are still areas where there are markets and schools. People still have to buy and sell products and get educated. So tertiary sectors do exist in developing countries, just not to the degree that they have in developed countries. Not only do we look at the Human Development Index to determine the level of development for a country, we can also look at Rostow's stages of development. There are 5 stages in this model. Stage 1 is a traditional society, which is very dependent on rural economy of agriculture. Stage 2 is a transitional stage that includes social appreciation of education and skill development. Countries are starting to sell some of their surpluses in agriculture to create infrastructure and begin specializing in small manufacturing, generally in textile industries. Starting in stage 3 of Rostow, states begin rapid industrialization in one area and growing investment in others. Regional growth is happening. Political change starts to be dependent on a more suburban economy. Stage 4 is the drive to maturity and is dependent on diversifications of industries. You're getting more industries, innovation, less reliance on imports. A lot of government investment is occurring at this stage. Finally, the 5th stage of Rostow is the high mass consumption stage, which is very consumer oriented. Countries are fully dependent on the global economy. and are buying goods from other countries. States are no longer manufacturing in their country, except at a small, very luxury scale. Third way to look at development worldwide is the Wallerstein world systems theory. Wallerstein breaks the world into three segments. The blue countries in the picture are the core countries, where all the money and power sits. These are the most important nations in the world on a global scale. The purple countries in the picture are the semi-periphery countries. These countries rely on the core to sell their products, but also rely on the periphery countries to get their raw materials to make their products. Finally, the periphery countries, which on this map are in red. And these countries are on the outside of the economy. They are very much less developed countries, and they sell their mass resources to the semi-periphery to get money for their country so they can begin to develop. Each portion of Wallerstein's system, the core, the semi-periphery, and the periphery, are dependent on each other. The core depends on the semi-periphery to buy products. The core also depends on the periphery to buy resources, should they need them. The semi-periphery sells products to the core and buys natural resources from the periphery. Finally, the periphery sells resources to both semi-periphery and core to bring investment into their countries. All three are dependent on each other. Now, in this picture, you see China and India as semi-periphery. Small portions of both of those countries are very developed and are definitely in the semi-periphery heading toward core. But the majority of their countries are still very poor and agricultural oriented. The problem with the world lies in its inequality. It's not equal as to where the natural resources sit, so it is unequal to where the wealth sits in the world. There's a lot of development gaps where poor countries may have natural resources and are hoping to gain money through sales. Rich countries would like to keep the less developed countries poor because then that would mean their resources would stay cheap. Rich countries really don't want poor countries to become developed because that would increase the prices of labor and resources. When we're talking about development, we look at three more measures. The gross domestic product of a country, which measures the market value of all the final goods and services which are produced and rendered during a specific time in a country. The gross national income of a country is the total amount of income earned by the residents of a country, and the Human Development Index from earlier. When we put those measures of development together, we can determine just how developed a country is or how not developed a country is. We can also talk about gender inequality in countries, whether women have equal or unequal access to education, to jobs, or to resources. We talked in Unit 5 about how women are the farmers in the world, but their access to arable land or resources is less than when men are farmers. It's the same way in industry. Women don't have the same ability to increase their personal economies because they may be paid less or denied education or the ability to get jobs. We have had three industrial revolutions in our history. The first industrial revolution was where we created the steam engine. This is in the 1770s with the addition of James Watt's steam engine, and we began to be able to power creation of products through direct use of steam to make wheels run, turbines. The second industrial revolution is where we figured out how to use the steam engine from the first industrial revolution to turn a motor to create electricity and then power the machines with the electricity. We still use the steam engine in our world. We just use it to create electricity, and then we use the electricity to power our homes and run our appliances. We are in the third industrial revolution, which is the computer age. We are creating computers which are intended to make life easier. We can do many tasks in the blink of an eye that we used to have to do by hand. Artificial intelligence is an offshoot of the third industrial revolution, when computers are now able to use the information found on the internet globally and then make informed decisions about questions. Computers are not thinking for themselves. We are not Terminator and Skynet stage, but using the available information, computers can now make decisions on basic things. I'm going to jump into industry for a little bit. We've talked about levels of development, so let's talk about industry. When we did the agricultural unit, we learned where to place crops to make the most money based on costs and perishability. When you place an industry to make the most money, it has the same kind of factors. These factors begin with whether or not you're going to have enough labor or enough skilled labor. Second, will you have a cost-effective ability to transport your products? Are there roads or railroads or rivers to move finished products or resources? Raw materials are third. Will you have a ready access to the raw materials needed to make whatever product you're going to make? And can you get them quickly and cheaply enough? And finally, is there a market for your product? You can make all the products you want, but if no one will buy your product, your factory will fail. You want to ensure that you have a market. These four factors help determine businesses where to put a factory. Alfred Weber, or Weber, he was German, he created a least cost theory that focuses on transportation, labor, and what's called agglomeration economies. He looked at where the factory needs to be placed based on the cost of the product to make and deliver to market, how much the labor is going to cost you, and are there other factories or services nearby to help keep the factory running. Weber worried mostly about the cost of transportation and the final weight of a product. If the final weight was light, then the factory could be built farther away from the markets because it would be cheap to transport. On the other hand, if the final product was heavy, Weber theorized that the factory should be closer to markets because transporting the final product would be expensive. So putting it close to the market or the people would keep costs down. Weber was very much in favor of placing his factories near other factories, whether they're making his product or not, so they could share labor, electricity, and infrastructure needed to keep a factory moving. Agglomeration is the clustering of industries together to benefit the factory owner by reducing costs and sharing services. If you're sharing services such as roads or labor or electricity, in the end it becomes cheaper for all of you. With globalization, placing a factory becomes a bigger calculation. Where you place your factory comes from some interesting choices with increased global connections and time-space compression. Time-space compression from Unit 1 means we no longer must place our factories super close to the market, since technology means we can transport resources and products farther and faster. Car manufacturing still occurs close to where the people are and who want to buy it because cars are very heavy. But t-shirts can be made in another part of the world and still be made cheaply enough for the consumer to purchase. We call that outsourcing. And most of the products that we purchase in the United States are created, built, or assembled in other countries and then shipped to our country for even cheaper than it costs to make it in the United States. When we move factories, we call this outsourcing or offshoring. Companies don't want to pay a living wage of workers in a developed country because it's too expensive for them and it hurts their profit margin. So by offshoring or outsourcing their factories to less developed countries, they can pay less money to workers. Even if we're shipping products across the globe, it's still cheaper to do that than to pay the cost in a developed country, which is why many of our products are made in China, Thailand, or Honduras, because businesses can pay less money to workers and still be able to ship their products to the US or Western countries for cheaper than it costs to make it here. Some countries create what we call special economic zones within their borders to allow for foreign investment by businesses in less developed countries. These zones attract businesses to their country to help them. On the screen, you can see Kenya, which has many special economic zones. Special economic zones in different parts of China encourage Western companies to locate their factories in China. Many less developed countries do this. Some zones allow factories to maybe pollute more or pay even less than the going rate in the rest of the less developed country as a way to incentivize businesses to come to their country and build factories and eventually help those countries industrialize. Many parts of the developed world have begun the process of deindustrialization. The level of manufacturing we had in the United States in the 1950s does not exist anymore. We don't make much anymore because we're not a factory-based economy. We have moved past that a long time ago. And any products we do make, we now outsource to less developed countries. There is a shift from manufacturing to services. The United States and many Western countries, Europe and Canada, are as more service-based economies in stage 5 of Rostow, at the highest level of HDI, and are in the core on Wallerstein. And therefore, we don't need to make products or need the factories that made those products. As part of this offshoring and deindustrializing, we use what is called just-in-time delivery. I order a product and it says it'll be here by 5 p.m. Companies use this to bring inventory to existing factories. Car manufacturing, for example, they don't have giant warehouses full of car parts. They order the parts to get there right when they need them. For example, today we're putting in seats, and so the seats arrive in trucks. We pull them off the trucks and install them. That truck leaves, goes, grabs more. It's a way to increase efficiency when minimizing inventory. We're going to talk a little bit about economic geography. Many countries are blessed with a variety of natural resources. The Industrial Revolution began in England when they found coal and raw materials to make iron. They could build railroads and create factories. The United States is just covered in these resources. Also, most of Europe was. Many countries were not blessed with this heavy abundance of resources. So whether or not a country can develop is sometimes based on where they sit globally. Global trade patterns can alleviate this dearth of resources if a country is able to purchase materials to bring into their country and then to build the products that they want to. Based on the Wallerstein system, the periphery countries are selling those resources to the semi-periphery, and the periphery countries are trying to bring in money for their countries. There are many environmental impacts of industry. Pollution is the biggest impact of industry. When you're building products, you may be pumping smoke out of your factories. Maybe you're using water and it's being polluted and then put back into rivers. If your process involves a lot of resources, depletion may occur when you run out of a resource in your area, and you're going to have to try to find a new resource base to bring in more resources. That can happen also. The goal in our world is to create sustainable development and industry to attempt to balance economic growth and the building of products, working at the same time to ensure that the environment is not impacted to the level which can cause irredeemable damage. Let's look at some questions to see how well you did with this review. Which country is most likely a core country? Is it A, Ethiopia, B, the United States, C, Nepal, or D, Venezuela? Take 10 seconds to choose the best answer from the choices given. If you chose the United States, you chose correctly. The U.S. sits in the core. Question number 2. Weber's model focuses on A, climate, B, cost minimization, C, culture, or D, migration. Please take 10 seconds, choose the best answer from the choices given. If you chose B, cost minimization, that is correct. Anytime you're looking to place a factory, you want to ensure you minimize your costs, whether it be transportation, whether it be labor, so that you can make a profit. Question number 3. Which sector involves services? Is it A, primary, B, secondary, C, tertiary, or D, quinary? Please 10 seconds to determine which sector involves services. If you chose C, tertiary, you are correct. The tertiary sector is about services. A is resources out of the ground. B is turning resources into products. C is selling those products. And D is about knowledge and leadership. And question 4. Western Europe and North America sit in the blank in Wallerstein's theory. Is it A, primary, B, periphery, C, tertiary, or D, core? 10 seconds. If you chose D, the core, you're correct. Modern developed nations sit at the very core of the world economy in Wallerstein's theory. A little FRQ practice for you. Explain how location affects industrial development. Once again, as in explain, we fully describe and provide examples. The locations of industry near people or away from people or near resources or away from resources can help or hurt growth. To discuss how it helps or hurt, you can use Weber's theory on placing a factory near the market, near the labor, depending on the transportation costs of the final product. Make sure you know your key vocabulary in this unit, of course. Know the definition of development, Human Development Index, what core is as opposed to periphery or semi-periphery, understanding agglomeration and outsourcing. Silicon Valley is a good example of agglomeration. All of those tech companies out in California are near each other. They're sharing university grads. Outsourcing of products is used to make a profit margins higher for companies because they're keeping costs low by using cheaper labor in less developed countries. Quick final review of Unit 7. Development varies globally, depends on the country you're in. Industry will depend on location, with some areas being a great place to put industry and some places not so much. Understand how globalization has reshaped economies by the ability of companies to move their factories to less developed nations. Be able to explain how development models and know your economic sectors and understand industrial impact factors, both positive and negative. When it comes to placing factories, running factories as countries develop, all very important. Thank you for watching our final unit review video. Next will be a quick video about free response questions and tips from readers to help you write a good free response question.